We had been hiking most of the afternoon before settling into that little hollow in the backcountry of West Virginia. My wife and I had been looking for a spot off trail, somewhere that felt tucked away but still safe enough to set up camp without worrying about rock slides or flooding if rain came in. We stumbled on it almost by accident, a bend in the creek where the water fanned out and dropped maybe 6 or 7 feet over a small rock ledge into a clear pool. It looked like something out of a postcard, the water smooth and green, the steady sound of the falls keeping everything else hushed. The trail itself was maybe 50 yards up the hill behind us, so close enough that we could climb back up if we needed, but far enough that our camp felt hidden. We set the tent just above the creek bed on a flat patch of soft dirt where roots weren't pushing through. I got a fire going, the smoke curling up into the trees, and we cooked a simple dinner on the coals. The sun dipped out, the woods turned that deep shadowed blue, and by the time the fire burned down to embers, we were both tired enough to crawl into the tent. The sound of the waterfall was steady, and it mixed with the crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was one of those rare nights where you think, this is why I came out here, this exact feeling of quiet with the woods wrapped around us. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. My eyes blinked open, and for a second I thought maybe it was the dream I'd been having. Then I noticed the light. A beam of a flashlight was cutting across the inside of our tent. It moved slowly, back and forth, like someone was searching. The color of the beam was that harsh white LED kind, sharp and out of place compared to the soft orange glow of a camp lantern. It wasn't coming from the trail behind us. It was coming from across the creek, up on the hillside. I held still, my heart already thumping harder than it should have. The light passed over again, brushed against the mesh of the tent, then drifted away. I eased my head up and peered through the screen. The other side of the creek was darker than ours, thick with brush and tall trees, but I caught the shapes of 2 figures. They were standing just far enough up the slope that I couldn't make out much more than their outlines, but I could see the faint movement of their heads, the glow of the flashlight swinging in one of their hands. For a long moment, I just watched them. My wife was still asleep, breathing slow beside me. I felt that tightening in my stomach, that instinct that something wasn't right, but my brain kept trying to explain it away. We weren't the only people in the backcountry, not by a long shot. Maybe they just left the trail to take a leak. Maybe they got turned around and were trying to find their way back. Maybe they saw the reflection of our tent and didn't realize they were shining right into it. I held on to those thoughts because they were easier than the other ideas pushing in, the ones about strangers watching us at 2 in the morning, standing in the dark, silent. The figure stayed for a few minutes, just standing there, the flashlight beam shifting around now and then, but not really pointing at us anymore. I laid back down, staring at the nylon roof of the tent. My chest was still tight, but after a while, I convinced myself that it was nothing, just people being people in the woods. I closed my eyes and tried to let the sound of the waterfall cover everything again. I must have dozed for a bit, but it couldn't have been long. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe less. I opened my eyes again, and there it was, the flashlight, raking across the tent walls, brighter this time, closer. I sat up fast and pressed my face against the screen. The beam was down on the creek bank now, not across the water. Whoever it was had come down the hill and was standing right near the edge, not 20 yards away from us. The light swept over the trees, the rocks, then right across the tent like a slow scanner. Every nerve in me fired at once. My voice came out sharp, louder than I meant, and it carried across the water. I barked out something along the lines of, "Keep it moving." My throat was tight, and the sound of my own voice startled me almost as much as the light. The flashlight froze, then angled back up the hill. I saw the vague shadow of someone moving. Then the beam climbed higher through the trees until it disappeared. I sat there for a long time, listening to my pulse hammer in my ears. My wife stirred, half awake, asking what was going on. I told her not to worry and to go back to sleep, but I knew I wouldn't be sleeping again. I stayed sitting upright, every so often peeking through the mesh to scan the dark hillside. Every small sound, branches cracking, water shifting, set me on edge. The woods didn't feel calm anymore. They felt like they were holding something just out of sight. The night dragged on. I watched the darkness slowly thin, my legs stiff from staying cross-legged so long. When the sky finally started to brighten, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That creeping dread that had sat in my chest all night began to ease a little. I still didn't see or hear anyone else, no more lights, no more movement, but I couldn't shake the image of those figures standing up on the slope, watching silently, then coming down to the creek. By morning, we both stepped out, and everything looked as ordinary as it could. The waterfall still ran steady, the pool looked calm, the woods were alive with birds again. I checked the far bank carefully, my eyes tracing up the hill where I thought I had seen them. I couldn't see any tracks from that distance, and I wasn't about to cross over to look closer. We packed up faster than usual. I didn't say much to my wife, just that I wanted to get back on the trail early. She didn't argue. By the time we were walking out, the whole thing already felt strange. Like maybe it hadn't happened the way I remembered. Maybe it was just my nerves getting carried away in the dark. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew the light hadn't been my imagination. When we made it to the trailhead later that morning, I could feel the exhaustion hit me all at once. I hadn't slept since that first flashlight beam, and by 10 I needed to stop and rest just to get through the last stretch. We sat down, drank water, and let the sun warm us, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Out there in the woods at 2 in the morning, someone had walked down to the creek and stood just yards from our tent, shining their light right at us. They didn't call out, didn't explain themselves, didn't make any sound at all. Just came close enough to let us know they were there. That thought stayed with me long after we left West Virginia. The woods still call to me and I still go back out there, but every time I zip up the tent now, I think about that night. The dark doesn't feel the same once you've been watched like that. It's not the animals or the storms that unsettle you. It's the people you can't explain, the ones who don't belong out there, who move through the trees without a word, and leave you wondering why they came so close and why they left without a sound. I was camping with my youngest daughter, just the two of us. She was 7 at the time. It wasn't our first trip together. I spent my whole life outdoors, working in the trades, hunting, fishing, camping. Being outside is where I feel most comfortable. I've gone weeks alone in the backcountry, slept near bear tracks, listened to coyotes scream through the night, and never once did I feel unsafe. But that night, with my daughter, something came over me that I can't explain. We had driven up an old Forest Service road, miles from town, the kind of place where you don't see another person all weekend. It was late summer, warm during the day but already cooling down by the time we pulled in. I picked a small clearing off the road, tucked into the pines. It was quiet, just the kind of spot I liked. The ground was soft with needles, no rocks in the way, and enough open space to set up the tent without crowding. I'd camped in places like this dozens of times, maybe more, and it felt like a good site for us. We set up camp together. My daughter liked helping, even if it slowed me down. She carried little things, tent stakes, the flashlight, some cooking gear, and asked 100 questions while I worked. I don't mind, it keeps her busy. We got the tent up, laid out our sleeping bags, and I started sorting supper. Simple camp food, hot dogs, beans, and some fruit. She was poking around with sticks, making up little games, and I was cutting kindling. Everything should have felt normal, but as I was breaking sticks, I felt it. That low, heavy weight in my chest that told me something wasn't right. Not like the nerves you get hearing coyotes, not like worrying about weather rolling in. This was something else. It was sharp, sudden. 1 second I was relaxed. The next I felt like I was standing in the middle of the road with a truck barreling down on me. My skin prickled, the back of my neck got hot, and my stomach twisted. I looked around the trees, scanned the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the still woods, the same as they always were. I tried to shake it off. I've never been the kind of man to spook easy. I've cut down trees in the dead of winter, worked on roofs 30 feet up in the wind, been around wild animals close enough to hear them breathe. Fear isn't something that usually sticks with me, but this feeling wasn't like fear you reason with. It was pure, heavy dread. I kept glancing at my daughter. She was busy stacking pine cones, humming to herself. She had no idea. That made the feeling worse. Every instinct in me screamed to move her, to get her out of there, right now. I stood up and just listened. The woods were dead quiet. No wind through the branches, no squirrels, no birds. Not even the faint buzz of insects. Just nothing. I hadn't noticed until then, but once I did, it sent a jolt through me. In all my years outdoors, I'd never felt such a dead silence. Even at night, even in the thick of winter, the forest makes some kind of noise. This was like someone had shut the whole place off. I couldn't see a single thing wrong, but every part of me was telling me danger was near. Not in an hour, not later, but right there, right then. Imminent. I didn't think. I just acted. I told my daughter to stay close while I tore down what little we had set up. Normally I'm organized, careful, but not then. I didn't roll the tent, didn't bag the gear. I grabbed everything and hauled it to the truck, throwing it into the back like it was nothing but trash. Stakes still in the dirt, cooler half open, things clanging around. I didn't stop. My daughter just stood there wide-eyed, watching me work in a way she'd never seen before. She didn't say a word. I got the last bag in, slammed the tailgate, scooped her up, and put her straight into the cab. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The dread hadn't lifted. If anything, it got worse the closer I got to finishing. When I turned the key and the engine fired, it was like coming up for air after being underwater too long. I pulled us out fast, tires spitting gravel, headlights cutting through the trees. The whole time, I kept waiting to see something in the mirror, some figure, some animal, anything that could explain why I felt what I felt. But there was nothing. Just black woods rushing past and that knot in my chest that didn't loosen until miles down the road. When we finally hit the main highway, I slowed down. My daughter had fallen asleep, her head resting against the window. I sat there driving in the dark, hands tight on the wheel, trying to understand. I've camped through storms that ripped tents apart. I've woken up to bear tracks circling camp. I've had coyotes yipping so close it felt like they were in the tent with me. But I've never, before or since, felt the kind of cold, certain warning I felt that night. It wasn't nerves, it wasn't imagination. It was survival, pure and simple. I'll never know what it was. Maybe there was a predator close by I didn't see. Maybe someone was out there watching from the trees. Maybe it was something I'll never have proof of. All I know is that if I hadn't listened to it, if I'd brushed it off and gone about our night like usual, something would have gone very wrong. I can't prove it. I can only say I've never ignored that instinct since, and I never will. That night taught me something I didn't know until then. You can spend your whole life in the woods, learn every sound, every track, every tree, and still not know everything. Sometimes your body knows before your brain does. Sometimes the woods go quiet for a reason, and you don't get the luxury of knowing what that reason is. You just leave, and that's exactly what I did. I left without a second thought, without shame, because my daughter was with me, and in that moment, I knew the only right move was to get her out. Nothing else mattered. I've camped plenty since then, alone, with family, with friends, and I've never once felt that same thing again. Not even close, but I'll never forget it. That heavy, certain feeling that if we stayed, something terrible would happen. I trusted it, and because of that, we're here. That's all the ending I need. It had rained all day and the woods smelled heavy and damp, like wet leaves and mud had been stirred into the air. My dad, my sister, and I decided late that evening to still go camping on the property he liked taking us to. By the time we actually got there, it was pitch dark. The trees stood tall and dripping. The dirt road was soft and slick, and every step made a sucking sound as our boots pulled free from the mud. The headlights of the truck lit up nothing but rain-soaked trunks and shiny black puddles, and the sound of the engine shutting off left a quiet that didn't feel normal. It was so late, maybe 10 at night, and the only thing I wanted to do was crawl into bed. But we still had to set up the tent. We worked with flashlights in our mouths, fumbling with poles and stakes in the wet ground. The light beams swung back and forth, catching nothing but wet bark and branches, but I kept glancing at the dark gaps between trees. Every time I heard a drip land from high above or a branch snap under the weight of water, I felt a quick jolt in my stomach. Something about that night was pressing on me, like we were being watched, and I couldn't stop looking around while my hands fumbled with knots. My sister laughed at how muddy her jeans got when she knelt, but her voice sounded small in the heavy dark. By the time the tent was up, my arms and back were sore, my shoes soaked, and I was grateful to just crawl inside. The ground was damp even with the tarp laid out, and when I lay down, I could feel the cold through my sleeping bag. The sound of the forest was thick and wet, raindrops falling from leaves, a constant dripping around us, and the occasional far-off creak of trees swaying against each other. We tried to settle in quickly, the three of us packed close in the tent. I remember drifting off, but never fully. My body wanted to sleep, but my mind was running. Every time my eyes closed, I thought I heard something too sharp, too real, like a footstep muffled in wet ground. I told myself it was just drops falling heavy or maybe small animals moving through the undergrowth. But there was one moment where I was hovering in that place between waking and sleep, and I thought I heard it again. A steady step, heavier than before. My chest tightened and I froze, trying to convince myself I was just half dreaming. Then I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. My dad shot up from his sleeping bag in one quick motion, like someone had shaken him awake. Scared me worse than the sound. The way he sat up so fast, his head cocked like he was listening to something, made me instantly alert. I turned toward him, confused, and that's when I heard it. 2 footsteps, close this time, not far off. Big, heavy ones pressing into the soft ground right outside the tent. I stopped breathing and every sound seemed to stretch out. The steps were slow, deliberate, like something was circling. Then came a low grunt, deep enough that I felt it more than I heard it. My chest thudded so hard I thought it might give me away. I didn't want to move, didn't want to unzip the tent or even shift my weight. I thought maybe it was a person, maybe some crazy guy walking through the woods, and the thought filled me with panic. The grunting got louder, closer, and then suddenly there was a sound like something brushing against the nylon of the tent. The fabric pushed inward, just slightly, as if something leaned against it. My stomach dropped. My dad's voice boomed then, a sharp yell that made me flinch hard. He shouted with all the force he had, a raw, deep voice that cut through the night. The next moment was chaos. A massive growl erupted, guttural and animal, and the whole side of the tent shook as something swatted it. The impact made the nylon ripple and snap back, and I heard the distinct tear of claws ripping through fabric. My sister gasped and scrambled against the other side, and all I could do was press myself flat, frozen in place. The growl carried out into the night, long and furious, then silence. My ears rang in the quiet. I could feel my heart hammering in my throat, and every second stretched forever. None of us moved. The tent walls had fresh holes, jagged slashes where faint light leaked in from the moon above. My breathing felt loud, too loud, and I tried to slow it, thinking anything could set it off again. Minutes passed like that, though it might have only been 5. Each drip of water outside sounded sharp and clear, and every time the wind shifted through the trees, I thought it was coming back. My hands were clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. My dad stayed still too, leaning slightly forward, listening. My sister's breathing was fast and shaky, but she didn't say a word. When we finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent, it was the smallest sound, the faint scrape of the zipper's teeth. We hesitated at every inch. The night outside was damp and black, the smell of wet pine thick, and nothing moved. I half expected to see eyes reflecting back, or some huge shadow circling, but it was just the woods and the constant drip of water from the leaves. In the weak moonlight, we saw what had happened. The side of the tent had 3 long gashes carved into it, clean lines through the nylon. The ground outside was pressed down in wide patches where something heavy had stood. Mud showed the clear print of a paw, larger than my hand, deep enough to hold water from the rain. It was a bear, and it had been only feet away from us. We didn't sleep after that. We sat inside with the flashlights off, too afraid of the light drawing attention again. Every sound outside, an owl, a branch shifting, drops falling, felt like it could be it coming back. My chest stayed tight the entire night, waiting for another swipe at the fabric. The hours dragged and my eyes burned with exhaustion, but I couldn't close them again. When the first pale gray of morning finally started to push through the trees, the relief was so strong it almost hurt. The forest looked different in daylight, softer, but the damage to the tent was proof of how close it had been. We stepped out carefully, scanning the tree line as if the bear might still be there. The ground around the tent was torn up, prints pressed deep into the mud, some circling, some leading off back into the thicker woods. We packed everything as fast as we could, hands clumsy with nerves. None of us wanted to linger. The tent folded with its ripped side flapping, and we shoved it into the truck bed without care. The whole time I felt like the bear could step out at any moment. Driving away down that muddy road, the forest closing in behind us, I finally felt like I could breathe again. Even now, years later, that tent is still stored away, holes slashed through the nylon. Every time I look at it, I think of that night, the sound of footsteps, the growl, the sudden violent shake. It was the closest I had ever been to something wild enough to kill me without hesitation. It wasn't a story someone told or a noise far off in the woods. It was right there, pressing against the thin fabric between us and it. That night taught me how fragile a layer of nylon really is when you're in the deep woods with something bigger than you. And it made me realize how fast safety can disappear when the sun goes down in the forest. I wasn't camping that night. I wasn't even near the woods. I was out on the water in a small bay off the coast. I had taken the boat out earlier in the evening just to clear my head. I liked being on the water at night, the way it felt removed from everything else. No cars, no houses, no people talking, just the slow rocking of the boat and the slap of small waves against the hull. The air was cool, the tide was steady, and I wasn't more than a few hundred feet offshore. I remember cutting the motor and letting myself drift. The moon wasn't bright enough to give me much light, but I could still see the vague line of the shore behind me. It was one of those quiet nights where the silence is so thick it feels like a presence, where even the sound of your own breathing feels loud. I must have been sitting out there for an hour or more when I heard it. At first, it didn't even register as something real. It was this distant, broken scream. Just one word, help. The sound was so sharp, so full of terror, that it didn't feel like it belonged in the same world as the quiet night around me. I froze and sat there listening. My ears strained so hard against the silence that I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then, about 20 seconds later, it came again. Help. Same voice, same tone, drawn out, desperate. I felt my stomach drop. Out there in the dark water, my little boat bobbing quietly, the sound cut through everything else. I scrambled for my flashlight and shined it out into the bay. The beam stretched out far, but all it touched was the rolling surface of the water. Nothing moved out there. I turned the light slowly from side to side, toward the shoreline, then back out toward the open water. Nothing. No shape, no splashing, no sign of life at all. But then it came again. Help. The exact same pitch, the same kind of blood-curdling desperation. It was the kind of scream that claws at your nerves. Not a playful yell, not someone drunk fooling around, but a scream like someone was actively being torn apart. I yelled out, my voice cracking a little, though I don't even remember what I said. Maybe something like, "Where are you?" Or just noise to try to answer back. The second I stopped yelling, the night went quiet again. 20 seconds passed. Then again. Help. Always the same distance away, always the same sound, and always impossible to place exactly where it came from. My flashlight cut across the water again and again, but it was like the bay swallowed everything. No matter which way I turned, the scream never got closer or farther. It was always just out there. That went on for minutes. Each time I heard it, my nerves stretched thinner. I gripped the flashlight so tight my hands started to ache. I felt the strange pressure in my chest, this horrible conflict between needing to help if someone really was out there, and the total helplessness of not knowing where to go or even if it was safe to try. I had no radio on board, no phone. My boat wasn't fast or equipped for anything like a rescue. Even if I knew the direction, what could I have done? But still, hearing that scream and sitting frozen felt unbearable. I started pulling at the oars, moving the boat slowly toward the general area where I thought the sound was coming from. But every time it rang out again, it sounded like it came from somewhere else. Left, then right, then farther away, then closer. It never matched. I would stop rowing and hold my breath, waiting, trying to pinpoint it. But it was impossible. It was as if the scream moved with the water, like it echoed across the surface, making direction meaningless. 10 minutes must have passed like that. 10 minutes of nothing but silence, broken by that single word tearing across the water again and again. Help, then nothing. The last time I heard it, I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up because it sounded closer than any of the others. It was sharp and raw, and then it just ended. No splash, no thrashing, no second word. Just gone. I sat there shaking, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and waited for it to come again. I told myself it would, but the silence held. I stayed there, drifting in the dark water, flashlight beams slicing over the empty bay, waiting. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Nothing. Just the water. Just the boat. Eventually, I gave up. My hands were stiff from gripping the oars, my mouth dry. I turned the boat back toward the faint outline of the shore and rowed in, my stomach twisting with every dip of the oars. The silence felt heavier on the way back, like the night was pressing down on me. I kept glancing over my shoulder into the black water, waiting for another sound, but nothing ever came. When I reached the dock and tied off the boat, my legs shook when I tried to stand. I didn't even look back at the water. I just gathered my things and walked quickly up the dock toward the harbor lights, the sound of my shoes on the wood too loud in the empty air. I went straight to the harbor master's office and reported it. Told them what I'd heard, how long it had gone on, and where I'd been. The man listened, nodded, wrote a few things down. He said they'd look into it, maybe send someone out. I didn't know if I even believed they would. When I went home that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice in my head again, that scream cutting through the dark. Help, over and over. In the days that followed, I kept checking the news, waiting for a story. Maybe a missing swimmer, maybe a capsized boat, something that would explain it. But nothing ever came. No reports, no accidents, no missing people. When I went back to the harbor a week later, I asked again. They said they didn't find anything. Nothing unusual. No signs of a struggle, no boats gone missing. Just an empty bay. That's what stuck with me more than anything. If someone was really out there, if they really needed help, how could there have been no trace? If it was an animal, why did it sound so perfectly human? If it was in my head, why did it repeat over and over at the same intervals for 10 solid minutes? There was no neat explanation. It was just me, alone in that boat, with the sound of a man screaming for his life carrying across the dark water, and nothing at all to explain it. To this day, I don't know what I heard. Maybe it was a real person, maybe not. Maybe some animal cry warped by the air and the water, maybe some kind of hallucination brought on by the quiet and the isolation. But I know what it felt like. Felt real. It felt like a man screaming for his life out in the black water, just out of reach. And the worst part is knowing I couldn't help, knowing I'll never have an answer. That scream has never left me. It still cuts through the silence in my head sometimes, sharp and raw, just like it did on the water. And all I can do is wonder what, if anything, really happened out there that night. I was 16 when this happened, and to this day, it's one of those memories that feels burned into my head. My family owned a piece of land up in northern Michigan, way out in the woods. It wasn't developed or anything like that, just forest, thick trees, patches of overgrown brush, and a couple small clearings where we'd sometimes set up camp. I had been going up there with my parents and relatives for years, but that summer I decided I wanted to try camping alone. Well, not totally alone. I had our dog with me, a black Chow Lab mix named Bear. He was built solid, heavy, and strong. But in personality, he was about the gentlest dog I'd ever known. He wasn't skittish, wasn't aggressive, just calm and easygoing. He rarely barked at anything, so the idea of him keeping me company while I camped felt safe. I drove up there in the afternoon, parked at the edge of the property where a narrow dirt track ended, and hiked my gear in a few hundred yards to a clearing we used a lot. It wasn't far, but once you were in that spot, it felt like you were miles from anyone. The trees pressed in thick around the edges, and when the wind moved through them, it gave this constant low rushing sound. I pitched my little two-person tent, rolled out my sleeping bag, stacked some firewood I'd collected, and boiled up something simple for dinner. Bear hung around close the whole time, sometimes lying in the grass with his head resting on his paws, sometimes sniffing around the edge of the clearing. As the sun went down, the air cooled fast like it always did up there, and I sat with him near the small fire, watching the sky turn from deep orange to black. Felt peaceful. I wasn't nervous at all that first night. It was quiet, and the only sounds were the fire popping, crickets in the grass, and the occasional soft rustle when Bear shifted his weight. I fell asleep in my bag with him curled up close to my feet. The second night was different. I'd spent most of the day walking trails through the woods, cutting across ridges and back down toward swampy low ground. By the time I made it back to camp, I was worn out, legs heavy, skin sticky with sweat and bug bites. I ate quickly, barely keeping the fire lit, then zipped up the tent and lay down with Bear stretched beside me. I must have dozed off in minutes. I remember waking up once in the middle of the night to roll over, the kind of half-waking where you hear the trees and the far-off night noises and then sink again into sleep. But then I woke up again, and this time it wasn't normal. Bear was standing in the middle of the tent, not sitting, not shifting around like he sometimes did, but rigid. His back was arched, the fur along his spine lifted straight up. His teeth were bared, and he was letting out this deep, almost vibrating growl. It wasn't the usual bark or rumble he made at a squirrel or a strange car. This was lower, darker, like it was coming from deep in his chest. I froze where I was, half tangled in my sleeping bag, heart starting to pound as I realized something outside had his full attention. His head was slowly turning, his body pivoting as if he was tracking something moving around us. I could hear it too, footsteps on the ground, deliberate circling, heavy enough that it wasn't a raccoon or rabbit. The sound of breathing came with it, a short snort now and then, like whatever it was pushing air hard through its nose. I didn't move at first. My brain was trying to make sense of it, telling me maybe it was a deer, maybe a bear, maybe just the wind knocking branches loose. But no, the footsteps were too steady. They crunched against leaves, then shifted softly against the pine needles. They paused, then moved again, changing direction. Bear's head followed perfectly, his body turning slow, the growl steady the whole time. My skin felt tight, like every nerve in me was stretched thin. I slid one hand blindly along the floor of the tent, searching for my flashlight. My fingers bumped over the corner of my backpack, a shoe, the cool nylon of my jacket, but I couldn't find the light. I kept my breathing shallow, afraid of making any sound at all. The thing outside kept moving, and the sound of it was close enough that I imagined if I pressed my hand against the tent wall, I'd feel it brushing past. Then Bear stopped turning, his whole body angled toward the flap of the tent, ears up, teeth still showing. The breathing outside was close, right there at the entrance. I couldn't see through the fabric, but I felt it. The weight of presence, something standing just inches away. My mouth had gone dry, my pulse hammering in my ears. I thought about unzipping the flap, shining my light, yelling to scare it off, but I couldn't make myself move. My imagination filled in shapes. A bear's snout pressing in, a man's shadow crouching low. Every possibility seemed worse than the last. I just lay there with my hand frozen on the bag, eyes wide open in the dark, waiting. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, maybe less, but it stretched out into forever. Then the footsteps shifted again, slow, moving away from the flap, circling once more. Bear's growl lowered, his body quivering, but he stayed on guard. After another slow turn, he sat back down right against me, still staring at the entrance. The growl faded to silence, but his eyes never left that flap. I didn't find the courage to move either. We stayed like that through the rest of the night, me half propped against my bag, him pressed against my side, his muscles tight every time a twig snapped outside. The dark finally began to thin around the edges of the tent, that faint gray that comes before sunrise. I don't think I slept at all after it started, just lay there waiting for the light to finally fill the clearing. When I unzipped the flap, Bear was still locked forward, and he shoved his head out before I even had the flap halfway open. The clearing looked calm in the dawn light. Trees stood still, grass wet with dew, the ashes of my fire cold. But the ground around the tent was disturbed. The pine needles and leaves were scuffed up, the dirt pressed down in irregular marks. Not the sharp hoof prints of a deer, not the clean pad tracks of a coyote, but wide depressions, heavy, like someone had walked in boots around the tent again and again. Some of them came right up to the entrance. I just stared, stomach sinking, my hands shaking as I realized how close it had been. I packed my things faster than I ever had before in my life. No coffee, no fire, just yanking everything into my bag, pulling the stakes from the ground with trembling fingers. Bear stayed on alert, ears flicking toward every sound in the woods. As I slung the pack over my shoulders and started down the path back to the car, I kept glancing behind me. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched clung to me all the way until I reached the dirt road and the sight of my car sitting where I'd left it. Only when I had the doors locked and the engine running did I feel like I could finally breathe. I never camped alone on that property again. For years, I avoided even setting foot there unless it was with other people. I still don't know what circled that tent that night. Could have been some stranger living rough in the woods. Could have been a hunter passing through. Maybe even just an animal with a weight and stride that didn't match what I thought I knew. All I know is that it wasn't supposed to be there, and it knew I was inside. If Bear hadn't been with me, I don't even want to think about how much worse it could have gone. That morning, I drove straight back to town. The sun still low behind the trees, my gear still damp with dew in the trunk. I told myself I'd go back another time, maybe when I was older, maybe with friends. But even now, so many years later, I can still hear that low growl in the dark, and I can still feel the weight of something standing just outside the thin nylon of the tent, waiting.